Hello, Grade 8. Let's continue The Count of Monte Cristo. Chapter 17. The day following the scene at Caderousse Inn, a man in his early 30s, with both the appearance and the accent of an Englishman, presented himself before the mayor of Marseille. Monsieur, he said, I am the head clerk of the firm of Thomson and French of Rome. For the past 10 years, we have been dealing with the firm of Morel and Son here in Marseille. Our dealings with them now involve approximately 100,000 francs, and we are somewhat uneasy about this money, for we have heard reports that the firm is threatened with bankruptcy. I have come from Rome expressly to ask you for the information on the matter. Monsieur, replied the mayor, I know that Monsieur Morel has been dogged by misfortune for the last 4 or 5 years, but although I myself am his creditor to the extent of 10,000 francs, I am not in a position to give you any information on the state of his finances. If you ask me my personal opinion of Monsieur Morel, I will tell you that he is an extremely honest man who has so far met all his obligations with scrupulous exactitude, but that's all I can tell you. If you wish to know more, I suggest that you see Monsieur de Beauville, the inspector of prisons. I believe he has 200,000 francs invested in the firm. Since his investment is much greater than mine, if there is really anything to fear, you will no doubt find him better informed than I am. The Englishman took leave of the mayor, and, with that gait peculiar to the sons of Great Britain, went off to see the inspector of prisons. Monsieur de Beauville was in his office. The Englishman asked him the same question he had just asked the mayor. Oh, cried Monsieur de Beauville, your fears are unfortunately very well grounded, and you see a desperate man before you. I have 200,000 francs invested in Monsieur Morel's firm. That money was to be my daughter's dowry, and we intended to have the wedding 2 weeks from now. I was to receive 100,000 francs on the 15th of this month, and another 100,000 on the 15th of next month. Then less than half an hour ago, Monsieur Morel came here to see me, and told me that if his ship, the Pharaon, hasn't arrived by the 15th, it will be impossible for him to make his payment to me. I'm afraid it looks like bankruptcy. You're quite worried about your investment, then? I consider it as good as lost. Very well, I'll buy it from you. At an enormous discount, I suppose. No, for 200,000 francs. Our firm doesn't do business that way. And how would you pay? Cash. The Englishman took out a roll of banknotes which contained at least twice as much as the amount of Monsieur de Beauville's investment. A flash of joy passed over the latter's face, but he made an effort to control himself and said, I must warn you that in all probability you'll receive less than 6% of that sum. That doesn't concern me, replied the Englishman. It concerns the firm of Thomson and French, in whose name I am acting. It may be that they wish to hasten the ruin of a rival firm. All I know is that I am prepared to pay you the sum if you will sign a deed of assignment, but I must ask you for a commission. Why, that's only fair, cried Monsieur de Beauville. The commission is usually 1.5. Do you want 2, 3, 5, more than that? Monsieur, said the Englishman, laughing, I am like my firm. I don't do business like that. No, my commission is quite different. Tell me, then. You're the inspector of prisons, aren't you? Yes. And you keep a register with notes concerning each prisoner? Yes, there's a record of each prisoner. Good. I was raised in Rome by a poor priest who suddenly disappeared one day. I later learned he had been imprisoned in the Château d'If, and I'd like to learn the details of his death. What was his name? The Abbé Faria. Oh, I remember him quite well, said Monsieur de Beauville. He was mad. He claimed to know the location of an immense fortune and offered fantastic sums to the government in exchange for his freedom. He died 5 or 6 months ago, last February. I'm sorry, my dog is loud in the background. Try to ignore her. I remember the date because the poor fellow's death was accompanied by a very peculiar circumstance. Might I know what the circumstance was? Asked the Englishman. Well, Faria's cell was about 50 feet away from that of a former Bonapartist agent, one of those who contributed most to the usurper's reign in 1815, a very dangerous man. I saw him in his cell in 1816 or 1817, and he made a deep impression on me. I'll never forget his face. The Englishman smiled almost imperceptibly. It seemed that Dantes, was that the dangerous Bonapartist's name? Asked the Englishman. Yes, Edmond Dantes. It seems that Dantes had either procured some tools or made them, for an underground passage was found between the cells of the two prisoners. I suppose the passage was made for the purpose of escaping. Precisely. But unfortunately, Faria was seized with a cataleptic fit and died. Dantes, however, still saw a way to escape. Thinking, no doubt, that prisoners who died in the Château d'If were buried in an ordinary cemetery, he carried Faria's body into his own cell, placed himself in the sack in which the body had been sewn up, and waited for the burial. But the Château d'If has no cemetery. The bodies of dead prisoners are simply thrown into the sea with a cannonball tied to their feet. You can imagine Dantes' surprise when he felt himself thrown from the top of the cliff. I wish I could have seen his face. That would have been difficult, remarked the Englishman. No matter, said Monsieur de Boville, who was in a very good humour now that he was assured of recovering his 200,000 francs. I can imagine what it looked like. He burst out laughing. So can I, cried the Englishman, who also began to laugh, but in the reserved manner peculiar of the English. Then he said, so the fugitive was drowned, was he? He certainly was. Very well. Now let's come back to the registers. Oh yes, excuse me, my story led me away from the subject. Come into my office, and I'll show you the records. They both went into Monsieur de Boville's office. Everything was in perfect order. The Englishman sat down in an armchair, and the inspector brought him the register and the folder concerning the Château d'If, inviting him to look through them as long as he liked, while he found himself sat down in a corner and read a newspaper. The Englishman quickly found the records relating to Abbe Faria, but the story told to him by Monsieur de Boville had apparently interested him greatly, for after perusing these documents he continued to leaf through the records until he came to those concerning Edmond Dantes. Everything was there, the letter of denunciation, the examination, Morel's petition, and Villefort's recommendations. He quietly folded the letter of denunciation and put it in his pocket. Then he read the examination, noted that the name of Noirtier was mentioned nowhere in it, and looked over Morel's petition dated April 10, 1815, in which, since Napoleon was in power at that time, he exaggerated the services Dantes had rendered to the imperial cause. He now understood everything. During the Second Restoration, the petition had become a terrible weapon in Villefort's hands. He was therefore not surprised when he saw the following words beside Dantes' name in the register. Edmond Dantes, ardent Bonapartist, took active part in return from Elba, to be kept in solitary confinement and under careful watch. He compared these notes with the certificate attached to Morel's petition, and saw that the handwriting was the same. They had both been written by Villefort. Thank you, said the Englishman, closing the register. I have everything I need, and now it's my turn to keep my promise. Make out a deed of assignment, and I'll give you the money. Monsieur de Boville hurriedly drew up the document, while the Englishman counted out the banknotes. Chapter 18. Anyone who had left Marseille a few years before, knowing the firm of Morel and Son, and then returned at the period of our story, would have found it greatly changed. Instead of the atmosphere of animation and well-being which radiates from a prosperous house, instead of the busy clerks hurrying through the corridors, instead of the courtyard filled with bales of merchandise and ringing with the shouts and laughter of the porters, what would have struck him immediately would have been the feeling of sadness and inertia. Of the numerous employees who had formerly peopled the offices, only 2 now remained. One was a young man of 23 or 24 named Emmanuel Herbault, who was in love with Monsieur Morel's daughter, and had stayed on with the firm despite all his family's efforts to make him resign. The other was an old, one-eyed cashier named Cocles, a good, patient, and devoted man, but absolutely inflexible when it came to arithmetic, the one point on which he would have stood his ground against the whole world, even against Monsieur Morel if necessary. He had been with the firm for 20 years, and he saw no reason to alter his faith in it now. The payments due at the end of the previous month had been made promptly and in full. But since that victorious end of the month, Monsieur Morel had spent many cruel hours. He had had to unite all his resources in order to make those payments, fearing that word of his distress might leak out in Marseille if he were seen taking such extreme measures. He took a trip to the fair at Bucar to sell some of his wife's jewelry and part of their silverware. Thanks to the sacrifice, he had saved the honor of his firm, but his funds were now exhausted. The return of the Pharaon was his only hope of being able to meet a payment of 100,000 francs due to Monsieur de Boville on the 15th of that month, and the other payments totaling 300,000 francs due on the 15th of the following month. But another ship, which had left Calcutta at the same time as the Pharaon, had arrived in Marseille 2 weeks ago, and there was still no news of the Pharaon. Okay, so Monsieur Morel, he's really on the verge of bankruptcy, good guys. Like, he is really, really close to becoming bankrupt, no? And the one thing that can save his business is the Pharaon arriving. However, the Pharaon is taking so long. Other ships that have been traveling have arrived already, but the Pharaon still hasn't arrived. And so Monsieur Morel is very, very nervous, no? Because if something happened to the Pharaon, if the Pharaon doesn't make it back to France, then they will for sure go bankrupt. Such was the state of affairs when the representative of the firm of Thomson and French called on Monsieur Morel. He was received by Emmanuel, who instructed Coquelas to take him to Monsieur Morel's office. On the staircase they met a beautiful young girl of 16 or 17, who looked at the stranger with anxiety. Monsieur Morel is in his office, isn't he, Mademoiselle Julie? Asked the cashier. Yes, I think so, said the girl hesitantly. See if my father is in first, Coquelas, then announce this gentleman. It would be useless to announce me, mademoiselle, said the Englishman. Monsieur Morel doesn't know my name. I'm the head clerk of Thomson and French, a firm which does business with your father's. The girl turned pale and continued on her way down the stairs, while Coquelas and the stranger continued to go up. She entered Emmanuel's office as Coquelas, using a key which he alone possessed, opened a door on the 3rd floor, led the stranger into an antechamber, went through a second door, and closed it behind him, then came back an instant later to tell the stranger he could enter. Monsieur Morel stood up and offered the stranger a seat. The worthy ship owner had changed greatly in 14 years. He was now 50, his hair had turned white, his forehead had become wrinkled with care, and his eyes, formerly so firm and decisive, had grown vague and irresolute. The Englishman looked at him with a curiosity that was obviously mingled with genuine interest. You know whom I represent, don't you? He asked. My cashier tells me you're the head clerk of Thomson and French. That's correct. My firm has a number of payments to make in France this month and next. Knowing your rigorous exactitude, they have obtained as many bills with your signature on them as possible, and have instructed me to collect the money from you as they fall due. Morel heaved a sigh and passed his hand over his forehead. You have bills signed by me, then? He asked. Yes, said the Englishman, taking out a bundle of papers. First of all, here's a deed of assignment for 200,000 francs, made out to our firm by Monsieur de Boville. Do you acknowledge this debt to Monsieur de Boville? Yes. It's an investment he made in my firm at 4.5% nearly 5 years ago. Half of it is due on the 15th of this month, and half on the 15th of next month. That's right. Then here are various bills due at the end of this month, and totaling 32,500 francs. I acknowledge then, said Morel, flushing with shame at the thought that he was perhaps about to be unable to honor his own signature for the first time in his life. Is that all? No. We also hold these bills due at the end of next month. Their total is 55,000 francs. In all, we hold bills for 287,000 francs and 87,500 francs. It would be impossible to describe Monsieur Morel's suffering during this enumeration. 287,500 francs, he repeated mechanically. That's right, replied the Englishman. Now, he continued after a moment of silence, I will not conceal from you, Monsieur Morel, that despite your reputation of perfect integrity, there is a persistent rumor in Marseille that you are not in a position to meet your obligations. Morel paled markedly at this almost brutal frankness. I took over this firm from my father, he said, after he himself had managed it for 35 years. In all that time, not a single bill signed by Morel and Son has ever been presented for payment without being honored. Yes, I know that, replied the Englishman, but as one man of honor to another, tell me frankly, will you pay these bills with the same exactitude? Such a frank question deserves a frank answer, said Morel. Yes, I'll pay them if, as I hope, my ship arrives safely, for its arrival will restore the credit which my successive misfortunes have destroyed. But should the Pharaon, my last resource, fail to arrive, it's cruel to say, but I'm afraid I'll be forced to suspend my payments. As I was coming here, said the Englishman, I saw a ship entering the harbor. I know. It was coming from India also, but it's not mine, said Morel. Then he added softly, this delay isn't natural. The Pharaon left Calcutta on the 5th of February. It ought to have been here a month ago. What's that? Asked the Englishman, listening intently. What's that noise? Oh, exclaimed Morel, what can have happened now? There was a great bustle of footsteps on the stairs. The two men also heard a cry of distress. Morel stood up to go over and open the door, but his strength failed him, and he sank back into his chair. Then the noise stopped, but Morel still seemed to be expecting something. There was a sound of a key being turned in the lock of the outer door. There are only two people who have a key to that door, Cocles and Julie, murmured Morel. Just then the second door opened, and his daughter appeared, her cheeks bathed in tears. She threw herself in his arms and said, "Oh, father, father, courage." "The Pharaon has been lost, hasn't it?" asked Morel in a choked voice. The girl said nothing, but she nodded, pressing her head against her father's chest. "And the crew?" "They were all saved by the ship that just came into port." Morel looked up with an expression of sublime resignation and gratitude. "Thank you, dear God," he said. "At least you've struck no one but me." Monsieur Morel is such a nice guy, good. The Pharaon sank, it got destroyed, and yet he still thanks God because none of his sailors drowned. None of his sailors died because another ship was able to rescue them. So even if his only hope of his business staying alive just sunk, he still was so thankful that his sailors made it alive. At this moment, Madame Morel came in sobbing, followed by Emmanuel. Behind them, in the antechamber, were 7 or 8 half-naked sailors. The Englishman started when he saw these men and took a step toward them, but then he restrained himself and withdrew to the furthest corner of the room. "How did it happen?" asked Morel. "Come in, Penelon," said Emmanuel, "and tell us about it." An old sun-tanned sailor stepped forward, holding a battered hat in his hands. "Hello, Monsieur Morel," he said, as though he had left Marseille only the day before. "Hello, my friend," said the ship owner, who could not help smiling despite his tears. "Where's the captain?" "He's sick, Monsieur Morel, and he stayed at Palma, but God willing, he'll be here in a few days as healthy as I am." "That's good. Now, Penelon, tell me about it." Penelon rolled his quid of tobacco from his right cheek to his left, wiped his lips, turned around, and shot a long jet of blackish saliva into the antechamber. Then he took a step forward and began. "Well, sir, we were somewhere between Cape Blanc and Cape Boyador, sailing along with a good southwesterly breeze, when Captain Gaumard came up to me. I forgot to tell you I was at the helm, and said, 'Penelon, what do you think of those clouds coming up on the horizon over there?' I just happened to be looking at them myself right then. 'I'll tell you what I think of them, Captain,' I said. 'I think they're coming up a little faster than they have a right to, and I think they're too dark for clouds that aren't up to something they shouldn't be.' 'I think you're right,' said the captain. 'We're in for a gale.' A gale, I said. Anyone who buys what's happening over there for a gale will make a nice profit on his money. It's an out-and-out hurricane, or I've never seen one. You could see the wind coming up the way you can see the dust at Montredon. Well, after we'd been tossed around for 12 hours straight, the ship sprang a leak. Penelon, said the captain, I think we're sinking. I'll take the helm. You go below and take a look at the hold. When I got below, I saw there was already 3 feet of water in the hold. I ran back up topside yelling, Man the pumps! Man the pumps! It was already too late. We went to work, but it seemed as if the more we pumped out, the more there was. After 4 hours of work, I said, since she's going to sink anyway, we might as well just let her sink. You can only die once. Is that how you set an example, Penelon? Said the captain. Just wait a minute. He went to get a pair of pistols from his cabin. I'll blow out the brains of the first man who leaves the pumps, he said. Well, nothing makes a man braver than a good reason like that. Then, too, the wind had died down a little by then, but the water was still coming in. Not much, about 2 inches an hour. 2 inches an hour seems like nothing, but in 12 hours it makes 24 inches, which is 2 feet. 2 feet plus the 3 we already had made, 5 feet. Now when a ship has 5 feet of water in her belly, she's no good to anyone. All right, men, said the captain, that's enough. We've done everything we could to save the ship. Now let's save ourselves. To the boat, then, as fast as you can. We loved the Pharaon, Monsieur Morel, but no matter how much a sailor loves his ship, he loves his own hide even more. We didn't argue with the captain when he told us to get into the boat, especially since the ship seemed to be groaning and saying to us, hurry up, leave, leave. And she wasn't lying. Poor Pharaon, because we could actually feel her sinking under us. We had the boat in the sea in less time than it takes to tell, with all 8 of us inside it. We weren't any too soon either. Right after I jumped into the boat, the deck burst with a noise like the broadside of a man of war. 10 minutes later, her bow plunged downward, then her stern. Then she began to turn around like a dog chasing its tail, and then no more Pharaon. As for us, we went for 3 days without eating or drinking, and we were already talking about drawing straws to see which one of us would feed the others when the Gironde picked us up and took us back to Marseille. And that's exactly how it happened, Monsieur Morel. On my word of honor as a sailor. Isn't that right, men? There was a general murmur of assent. You did well, my friends, said Monsieur Morel. You're all fine men, and I know in advance that I'd have done nothing to blame but my own bad luck. It's the will of God, not the fault of men. Now, how much do I owe you? Oh, let's not talk about that, Monsieur Morel. I insist on talking about it, said the ship owner with a sad smile. Well, we've got 3 months' pay coming, said Penelon. Cocklas, give 200 francs to each one of these brave men. In other times, I'd have added, and give each man 200 francs extra. But these are unfortunate times for me, my friends, and the little money I have left no longer belongs to me. So please excuse me, and don't think any less of me because of it. Now take your money, and if you find another ship, sign on board. You're free now. The last part of his sentence produced a strong effect on the worthy sailors. They looked at one another in bewilderment. Penelon almost swallowed his quid of tobacco, but fortunately he put his hand to his throat in time. What? He exclaimed, choking. Are you discharging us, Monsieur Morel? Are you dissatisfied with us? No, no, my friend, said Morel. I'm not at all dissatisfied with you, quite the contrary. But what else can I do? I have no more ships, so I no longer need sailors, and I have no more money to build other ships with. Well, if you don't have any money, don't pay us. We'll get along all right without it. Enough, enough, my friend, said Morel, choked with emotion. We'll see each other again some day in happier times. Emmanuel, go with him and see that my wishes are carried out. He made a sign to Cocklas, who walked out of the office. The sailors followed him and were in turn followed by Emmanuel. And now, said Morel to his wife and daughter, leave me for a moment. I must speak with this gentleman. He glanced toward the representative of Thomson and French, who had stood silently in his corner throughout the entire scene. The two women withdrew, leaving the two men alone. Well, said Morel, sinking into his chair, you saw and heard everything. There's nothing more I can tell you. I saw, said the Englishman, that you have just been the victim of a new disaster, which was as undeserved as the others, and this has confirmed me in my desire to be helpful to you. I am one of your principal creditors, am I not? You at least hold the bills which fall due within the shortest time. Would you like me to postpone the date of payment? A postponement would save my honor and therefore my life. How long would you like? Morel hesitated. 2 months, he said. Very well then, I'll give you 3. But do you think your firm will? Don't worry, I take full responsibility. Today is the 5th of June. Renew these bills for the 5th of September. I'll be here at 11 o'clock in the morning. The clock had just struck 11 on the 5th of September. The new bills were made out, the old ones torn up, and the poor ship owner, at least, had 3 more months in which to assemble his last resources. The Englishman received Morel's thanks with his usual reserve, then bade him goodbye. On the stairs he met Julie. She pretended to be going down, but in reality she had been waiting for him. Oh, monsieur, she began, clasping her hands. Mademoiselle, said the stranger, you will receive a letter signed Sinbad the Sailor. Do exactly what that letter tells you to do, no matter how strange it may appear to you. Very well. Do you promise to do what the letter says? I swear it. Good. Farewell, mademoiselle. Continue to be the good and upright girl you are now, and I'm sure God will reward you by giving you Emmanuel as your husband. Julie uttered a little cry and turned as red as a cherry. The stranger continued on his way. In the courtyard he met Penelon, who had a roll of banknotes in each hand and seemed unable to decide whether to keep them. Come with me, my friend, said the Englishman. I want to talk to you. That's the end of chapter 18.